Rich culture and remarkable works that have stood the test of time were only possible thanks to the blessings of one of the gods that shaped the world. In the beginning of everything, there was only a giant chaotic ocean called Nun, and nothing else. But in these waters, a great pyramidal mound emerged. At the top of this mound was a lotus flower, which, when it blossomed, unfurled a strong light that spread out and scared away the darkness. The source of all this light was Ra, the sun god. Ra was alone and begot the first generation of gods. Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of rain, were born. The universe was still dominated by the immense mass of primordial waters. Shu and Tefnut plunged into the waters to explore their immensity. Ra was distressed to find that his children were not returning. Fearing he would never see them again, he sent Hathor to find them. Shu and Tefnut returned safe. Ra's joy was such that the tears from his eyes gave birth to human beings. After returning, the descendants of Ra begot Geb, god of the earth, and Nut, goddess of the sky. This is how heaven and earth were created. The great god Ra ruled the universe sovereignly, with the title of the first pharaoh. The god offered Egypt several sacred animals, such as the ox and the lion, but his greatest gift was the creation of the river Nile. Around its banks, man would build a civilization to please the gods. In his human form, Ra was worshipped by the Egyptians as god and pharaoh. But as he grew older and his glory faded, men began to worship the serpent Apophis, which angered Ra. Ra ordered the lioness god Sekhmet to organize a great slaughter to punish the men. Many of those who survived Sekhmet's attack drowned in the flood of blood that followed. Ra's earthly reign seemed to be nearing its end, and he retired to his solar boat. In it, the god traversed the skies during the day. But during the night, he would enter the underworld, the realm of the dead. In the underworld, he faced the serpent Apophis. Each sunrise meant a new victory for the god over darkness. The gods Nut and Geb gave birth to a powerful offspring: Isis, Nephthys, Seth, and Osiris. They would take over the government of the world, while Ra reigned in the heavens. Osiris went on to reign over the world, occupying the throne that was formerly Ra's, leading humanity to civilization. But the throne of the new god was not secure, for his brother Seth wanted to take all the power for himself. This was the beginning of the saga of the gods of Egypt. After replacing Ra, the deity who gave birth to the Egyptian world, Osiris became the new supreme god. He chose Isis as his wife and began a new and prosperous reign. Osiris showed civilization to men, who until that moment lived in a primitive way. The god taught them agriculture, weaving, and how to make bread, and also to use laws that would give order where before there was only chaos. Egyptian civilization began to flourish under the reign of the kindly god Osiris. But Osiris had a powerful and ambitious brother, Set. His kingdom was situated in the arid desert surrounding Egypt. For this reason, Set envied his brother, who had a fertile and prosperous kingdom. Osiris had an affair with Nephthys, Set's wife. From this union, Anubis, the god of the dead, was born. Enraged by his own brother's betrayal, Set set his revenge. The god of dry lands and the personification of evil invited Osiris to a great feast in his honor. During the feast, Set presented the guests with a beautiful coffin, showing himself available to gift it to whoever would fit into it perfectly. Osiris was invited to test it. Soon after settling in, Set closed the coffin and locked the god inside. The evil god ordered the coffin to be thrown into the river Nile, putting an end to the life of the Lord of Egypt. Isis mourned the loss of her beloved husband. The tears flowed into the Nile River, giving rise to the traditional floods. The goddess and her sister Nephthys searched for the body of Osiris. After finding it, Isis tried to hide it. But Set found the body and quartered it into 14 pieces. The cruel god scattered the pieces of Osiris all over Egypt. Isis, with the help of Anubis, managed to recover all the pieces of her husband. Anubis united these pieces of the god and embalmed Osiris's body. With her divine powers, the goddess resurrected her beloved. But Osiris went on to reign in the world of the dead. After coming back to life, Osiris had a son with Isis. His name was Horus, who vowed to overthrow Set, the usurper of the throne that was rightfully his. Set, the god of destruction, had murdered Osiris, the reigning god of Egyptian mythology. He took his brother's throne for himself and initiated his reign of terror. Osiris, however, had begotten an heir together with the goddess Isis. His name was Horus. He was a falcon god, and it had been prophesied that he would reign over the heavens and bring back the light over Egypt, thereby ending the darkness brought by Set. As an adult, Horus decided to reclaim his throne, usurped by his uncle. This strife would bring even more chaos to Egypt, and so it would be tried by the gods. It was decided in the divine court, presided over by the solar god Ra, that the one who was worthy to sit on the throne would have to conquer several disputes, and so the duels between Set and Horus began. Set had the affection of Ra, since the usurper was protecting the solar god from the serpent Apophis while he was traipsing through the sky. The desert god proposed a challenge to Horus. Both of them were to become hippopotamuses and remain submerged for 3 months. Horus expected that his mother, the goddess Isis, would take advantage of Set's vulnerability to kill him. But the goddess did not have the nerve. Therefore, she was powerless to attack her brother. This treacherousness angered Horus, who attacked his mother, chopping off her head. The god Tot, a deity of knowledge, saved the goddess by putting a cow's head instead of the old one. The quarrel between Set and Horus lasted for many years. As they fought in the desert, Set managed to pluck out Horus's eyes. With the aid of Hathor, the goddess of love, Horus got his eyes back. The heavenly court of the gods required Set and Horus to reconcile. The malignant god, while feigning goodwill, invited Horus to a feast in his palace. But overnight, Set tried to abuse his nephew, rendering him undignified for the throne. Yet Horus managed to fight back and prevented the god from spreading his poisonous seed. Horus then decided to take vengeance. With the assistance of the goddess Isis, the god placed his holy seed in lettuce leaves, offered to Set by the goddess Isis. The god of the barren deserts devoured the tainted lettuce unsuspectingly. Envenomed, Set started to wilt in plain sight, and from his forehead a glowing disc burst out. Tot grabbed and fixed it on her own head. Set was embarrassed, and finally, after 80 years, the court granted Horus his birthright throne. Isis could not have been any prouder to see her son with Osiris assuming his father's throne. Set was bound to travel with Ra in his solar barge, and his raucous cries were audible through the noise of the thunder coming from the sky. This is how Horus's reign over Egypt started. and among his descendants were all of the pharaohs who once reigned over Egypt.
Egyptian mythology is full of exotic deities that have an appearance that mixes human features with animals. Besides these anthropomorphic divine figures, this mythology is also full of incredible creatures that further enrich the mythological universe created by this ancient culture. Today, we will meet some of the most impressive creatures in Egyptian mythology. This video is brought to you by NordVPN. As we spend more and more of our time online, concerns about privacy and security becomes vital. NordVPN uses more than 5,000 world-class next-gen server infrastructure in over 60 countries, meaning you get a secure, reliable VPN connection anytime, anywhere. It just takes a click. Open the map, click on a location, and you'll be connected in seconds. It's that easy. Access from anywhere. Don't miss your favorite content. Even when traveling abroad, stay at home virtually. Unblock your favorite games and geo-restricted servers. Don't let your location limit where you can play. Also, Nord offers you more than VPN service. You can also have security with NordPass Password Manager that safely secures your password so you never forget them. And NordLocker, a virtual cloud service that you can use to store and access your files safely anywhere you are. You can use NordVPN on up to 6 devices at main platforms: Windows, Android, iOS, macOS, and Linux, even on your Android TV. Go to nordvpn.com/seeyouinhistory to get a 2-year plan plus 1 additional month with a huge discount. It's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Make your connection to the world safer and more discreet with NordVPN. In ancient Egypt, the sun was considered the supreme deity. It was represented by Ra, a god with the body of a man and the head of a falcon. But deep in the underworld, there was a gigantic serpent named Apophis, which was looking for an opportunity to attack the solar bark of the god Ra. In doing so, it could destroy the rising of a new day in the world of the mortals. The ancient Egyptian myths say that Apophis sprang from the umbilical cord of Ra when he gave life to himself in the universe's vastness. It was the main adversary of Ra, the god of sun and light. Sometimes Apophis is described as a giant serpent, the top of whose head is covered with a hard, smooth stone called silicate. Every single day, Ra traveled through the heavens in his solar bark, illuminating the world. But at the end of the day, the falcon god sailed towards the Egyptian underworld, Duat. Apophis, trapped in Duat since the beginning of time, was already looking for a way to attack Ra's bark. Both deities engaged in epic combat that caused storms and earthquakes in the world of humans. Apophis faced other gods that accompanied Ra in his solar bark. The main opponent was the god Seth, who, at the bow of the bark, was always ready to strike Apophis with a spear. The giant serpent managed to swallow Ra's bark a few times, but was unable to keep it in his stomach for long, which gave rise to solar eclipses. Apophis lived in the underworld and was therefore sometimes considered a devourer of souls. Thus, the dead also needed protection from it. Sometimes funerals included spells to ward off the serpent. Egyptian priests organized rituals to curse Apophis and banish its evil presence from the world. They believed that this helped the god Ra to complete his sky voyage. The demonic monster, Ammit, was also a deeply feared creature by the ancient Egyptians, being known as the Devourer of the Dead. His body combined different animals: lion's front paws, hippopotamus's hind paws, and a crocodile's head topped with a lion's mane. Ammit was a funerary deity that lived near the scales of justice in the Hall of Two Truths in Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The god Anubis weighed the hearts of all deceased people to decide who deserved to go on to paradise or to be punished. The heart was placed on one side of the scale. On the other side was the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth, to counterbalance the organ's weight. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul of the deceased could head for Osiris and enter Aru, the Egyptians' paradise. But if the heart was heavy due to sins, it was considered impure. Emmet would devour the organ, and the judged person would not be allowed to continue their existence. After Emmet swallowed the heart, the deceased soul would be restless forever. This was considered dying a second time. Due to its cruel and animalistic character, Emmet was not entitled to temples or worship services, as it symbolized everything that the Egyptians feared. It threatened to imprison them in eternal suffering if they did not live an honest and kind life. Emmet represented the fairness of the afterlife. Everyone, rich or poor, good or bad, would be judged equally at the end of their lives. Not all mythological creatures had a grotesque or supernatural appearance. Some took on simple forms, but also limiting their powers. Bennu is one of the oldest deities in Egypt, being related to creation and rebirth. It is the original inspiration for the phoenix legends that have developed in various cultures. Usually depicted as a huge gray heron wearing a pharaoh's crown, Bennu, like the god of Ra, was a self-created being with an important role in the world's establishment. An ancient myth says that Bennu flew over the waters of Nun, the primordial ocean that existed before creation, landing on a rock and uttering a call that determined the nature of creation. Bennu was considered immortal, able to renew itself periodically. The same reasoning was applied to the sun that rose every day in the sky. It was also a symbol of rebirth associated with Osiris. It was often one of the forms taken by the god of the underworld to visit the mortal realm. Part of the first creatures to appear in the world, along with Atum and Ra, Bennu was worshipped as its cult center in Heliopolis. It was depicted in ancient paintings and funerary amulets as a symbol of rebirth. Beyond the Egyptian borders lived a wild and frightening creature, Serpopard. It was a monster with the body and head of a lion or leopard, and a long neck resembling the body of a serpent. Serpopard is also in Mesopotamian myths, where it is represented as a lioness with an exceptionally long neck. In ancient Egypt, Serpopards symbolize agents of chaos. They were often depicted in pairs in paintings, in high reliefs, hunting other animals, or with their necks entwined. Serpopards played an important role in the religious concepts of Upper and Lower Egypt. They were probably animals associated with protection and royalty. The image of this bizarre creature was used on household utensils of the Egyptian nobility and pharaohs. Another hybrid creature from Egyptian mythology is the griffin. Although it is also part of the myths of other peoples of Greece and Mesopotamia, it has unique traits in Egyptian traditions, with a dog-like body and a falcon's head. The Egyptian griffin assumed various shapes and sizes. Some depictions had wings, a leopard-like body, and a human head emerging on its back. In other myths, griffin represented a servant of Horus, being the embodiment of the god's power on earth, responsible for carrying out divine justice. Like Serpopard, the griffin also had protective functions and could ward off the action of demons and other evil creatures. The griffin seems to have been elevated to the status of heraldic animal of the pharaoh and appeared regularly in official documents. The statues of the sphinxes are iconic symbols of Egyptian architecture. The most famous is the Great Sphinx of Giza. It was once believed that these mystical creatures were real, with a lion's body, a human head, and sometimes hawk's wings. The myth of the sphinxes reached ancient Egypt, where the creatures were depicted with a woman's head, a lion's hips, and bird's wings. They were considered treacherous and merciless, killing those who could not answer their riddle. The deadly version of a sphinx appears in the myth and drama of Oedipus in Greek mythology. To the Egyptians, the sphinx was benevolent, but had a fierce strength and personality, like the malevolent Greek version. Both were considered guardians of temple entrances. In the most famous myth of the sphinxes, the goddess Hera summoned the sphinx that lived near the Nile River in Upper Egypt. The monster headed for Thebes, Greece, where it asked everyone who crossed its path the most famous riddle in history. What animal walks in the morning on 4 legs, in the afternoon on 2, and at night on 3? It strangled and devoured anyone who couldn't answer. Until a legendary king named Oedipus solved the riddle. It is man, for he crawls on all fours when he is a baby, then walks on 2 feet when he is grown up, and in the end uses a cane in old age. The second riddle was made. There are 2 sisters, one gives birth to another, and the latter gives birth to the former. Who are the 2 sisters? Oedipus answered, Day and Night. Defeated, the Sphinx threw itself off the high rock and died into the abyss. We don't know for sure how many monsters and fantastic creatures were part of religious beliefs in ancient Egypt. Many stories have been lost in the sands of time or have not been fully deciphered, but the legacy of Egyptian culture and mythology still fascinates people all over the world.
Anubis is the famous jackal-headed Egyptian god. He is a deity connected with afterlife and funeral rites. The god is one of the oldest Egyptian deities. His role has changed over the centuries. Anubis was considered the main deity connected with death and god of the underworld. But this role was later taken over by the god Osiris. The jackal god was also considered the deity of embalming and mummifications. In funeral rituals, it was common for a priest to wear a jackal mask during the mummification process. The god was also considered the protector of tombs in cemeteries, protecting the bodies of those who had departed to the underworld. Anubis is the son of the goddess Nephthys, wife of Set. But her son was not born from the union with her husband, for Nephthys disguised herself as the goddess Isis to unite with Osiris. In the face of such infidelity, Set plotted against Osiris, killing him and scattering the pieces of his body throughout Egypt. When Isis collected all the fragments, Anubis helped the goddess during the god's funeral ritual, and Anubis transformed Osiris's body into the first mummy. Anubis became the deity who guided the spirit of the dead to the underworld, where the deceased would be judged by a court presided over by Anubis. The god would place the heart of the deceased on the scales of Osiris, and a feather of truth would be put on the other side. If the heart was heavier than the feather, this indicated that the organ was full of evil. It was given to Amet, a demonic creature known as a heart-eater. If the feather was heavier than the light heart of the soul of the just and good, Anubis would lead the deceased to Osiris to enter the afterlife. During the period of Greek domination over Egypt, the god Anubis was associated with Hermes. Hermes in Greek mythology is also the deity who led souls to the underworld. This association gave rise to a deity called Hermanubis, who became popular during the period of Roman rule. Anubis is one of the most popular deities in Egyptian mythology. He is the god responsible for leading souls to the afterlife. Sobek is a famous Egyptian god with a crocodile head. He is a deity of the Nile, the important river that flows through Egypt and fertilizes its lands. The god is one of the oldest Egyptian deities and has been worshipped for more than 4,000 years. The pharaohs deeply admired this deity, as they believed that the crocodile god could protect them from evil spells. Crocodiles are very common animals in Egypt. The species Crocodilus niloticus, also known as the Nile crocodile, is one of the largest species of these reptiles, and also one of the most dangerous. But Sobek, although powerful, was a kind god. Therefore, the ancient Egyptians prayed to the god to calm the aquatic beasts. Some myths attribute the rise of the Nile to Sobek. The river would have emerged from the sweat of the crocodile god. Because he was closely connected to the sacred river, Sobek was considered a god of fertility. The Nile's flood cycles were responsible for fertilizing the entire floodplain, making these surrounding lands extremely fertile. Sobek was worshipped in many regions of ancient Egypt, but mostly in Fayum and Kamombo. The Sobek cult was very present because of the large number of crocodiles in those areas. When one of these crocodiles died, the animal could be mummified. In the Crocodilopolis temple, there were several mummies of these animals. A mummified crocodile could also be buried along with the mummies of pharaohs and other figures of nobility. The Egyptians believed that crocodile mummies protected them even after death. Before this, the city of Kamambo worshipped the god Horus, Sobek's brother. But after a fight, the crocodile god expelled Horus and started to rule the place by himself. But with Horus gone, the region was plagued by many evils. Sobek reconciled with Horus, and both started to take care of the region and share the worship of men in the Kamambo temple. Today, we can visit the temple and its museum, where there are dozens of mummified crocodiles. In some places in Egypt, there were large pools where crocodiles were bred and tamed. These animals were revered as the embodiment of Sobek. Some of these were almost docile, making it possible for the Egyptians to adorn them with jewelry and ornaments. In this way, they felt closer to Sobek, the crocodile god. Bastet is the cat goddess of Egyptian mythology. She is represented as a being with a woman's body and a cat's head. Cats were honored animals and considered sacred by the Egyptians. Cats played an important role in the Egyptian world, as the animals protected people's food from rodent infestations. And cats also scared off dangerous, poisonous snakes. Bastet is a goddess connected with the sun. Therefore, during the day, the goddess followed Ra on his journeys across the sky in his solar boat. During the night, the goddess took the form of a full cat, and she protected the world against the terrible serpent Apophis. The goddess was worshipped throughout Egypt. To harm any cat was a terrible sacrilege. The perpetrator of such violence could be sentenced to death. Cats were considered family members. According to some accounts, when a house was burned down, cats would enter the blazing dwelling to help the residents escape. Sometimes these cats seemed to die in the flames, but thanks to the goddess Bastet, they would come back to life, reinforcing the popular saying of the cat's 9 lives. Being sacred animals, cats were mummified. In Egypt, there are cemeteries dedicated to these mummies. According to some versions, the goddess Bastet is linked to Sekhmet, the lioness goddess. The latter was violent and bloodthirsty, but was pacified, becoming a meek, milk-drinking cat goddess. In other versions, Bastet and Sekhmet are sisters and daughters of Ra. Even with the end of the Egyptian god cult, cats continue to look down on men, hoping to have their divinity recognized once again. Set was one of the most famous gods in Egyptian mythology. He was the son of the gods Geb and Nut, the sky and the earth, and the brother of Osiris, Isis, and Nephthys. Like most Egyptian gods, Set was represented as a man with an animal head, but to this day it is debated which animal this was. Some say he was a hybrid beast, a mixture of pig and donkey, or an aardvark, an animal similar to an anteater, but there is no consensus. The god personified violence and destruction, and was also considered a trickster. Set was the lord of the deserts and infertile lands, while his brother Osiris was worshipped as the god of fertility. The god Set was married to Nephthys, and, according to some traditions, because Set was the god of infertility, he would have had no descendants. Set was very jealous of his brother and devised a plan to take his throne away from him. The god of destruction murdered his brother and stole his throne. But Osiris had had a descendant named Horus, the falcon god. The latter sought to avenge his father's death and take the throne from the usurper. The clash between Horus and Set is one of the most famous stories in Egyptian mythology. For a long time, the gods fought among themselves, but Horus emerged victorious. The gods recognized the vast power of Set, which was not to be wasted. Therefore, Set was to sail together with Ra, the sun god, and protect him from the terrible serpent Apophis. When Apophis appeared to attack Ra's boat, Set was poised to defend the world from the eternal night. According to some scholars, Set was considered one of the main gods of Upper Egypt at the early formation of the Egyptian civilization, as opposed to Horus, worshipped in Lower Egypt. But after the unification of Egypt, Set, associated with the northern Semitic invaders, lost much of his prestige. The victory of Horus's followers over the Hyksos who worshipped Set symbolized the victory of the forces that represent order against the agents of chaos and destruction. Set was considered responsible for the destruction of crops, hunger and thirst, scorching heat, and great droughts. The day that represented the birth of Set was seen as a day of bad luck, where new projects and ventures were to be avoided. Although defeated and rejected, the great power and influence of Set within the ancient Egyptian religion is undeniable. Isis is the most important goddess in Egyptian mythology. She personified the faithful wife and loving mother. The goddess was the daughter of Geb and Nut, being married to Osiris. Her cult spread beyond Egypt, coming to have a strong influence in the Greco-Roman world. Because she was recognized as a faithful wife, she was sometimes identified with the goddess Hera in Greece and Juno in Rome. The goddess mastered magic and was able to deceive the god Ra, extracting from the solar god the secrets about the laws that govern life and death. According to some traditions, she was the most powerful among the goddesses. After the murder of her husband committed by Seth, Isis wandered Egypt in search of Osiris's body. According to some traditions, the goddess gave rise to the Nile floods from the tears shed by losing her husband. After finding Osiris's body, she resurrected him and united with him, giving birth to the god Horus. Osiris left to reign in the underworld, and after being left without her husband, the goddess decided to devote herself to protecting her son Horus. Using magic, Isis was responsible for rebuilding Horus's eye, which was lost during a battle against Set. The Egyptian goddess was the protector of the dead, and with her blessings, she restored the souls of the departed to the underworld. Several temples were erected in honor of the goddess throughout Egypt, where she was venerated. Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt, taking advantage of the goddess's reputation, proclaimed herself the new Isis. But as it turned out, the goddess Isis was not very cooperative with Cleopatra. Cleopatra lost not only her throne, but also ended the Ptolemaic dynasty's rule over Egypt. Despite the decline of the cult of the Egyptian gods, the goddess Isis continues to be a source of inspiration and admiration for all lovers of mythology. Thoth is the god of wisdom in Egyptian mythology. The god is represented as an anthropomorphic figure, with the head of ibis, a bird of the pelican family. However, he was also represented as a baboon, another animal consecrated to the god. Thoth is the son of the goddess Hathor. She, disguised as the goddess Isis, had sexual relations with Osiris. From this union, Thoth was born, but other versions say that he is the son of Set. Thoth was attributed with the invention of writing. It was he who taught the Egyptians to make the most diverse records with hieroglyphics. The god was also responsible for writing laws and teaching mortals the science of accounting. Thoth is the god protector of scribes. Thoth was so revered in Egypt that he was considered the god of wisdom, astronomy, magic, and medicine, among other sciences of which he is the patron. The god Thoth was considered a kind, just, and conciliatory figure, but he was also implacable before the enemies of truth. The god had as a partner Maat, goddess of justice and truth. From this relationship was born Seshat, a daughter who was also goddess of wisdom. In other versions, Seshat is Thoth's wife. Often, Thoth was represented with a disk on his head. This disk represents the moon, making him a moon god. The ancient Egyptians used the cycles of the moon to measure time. Therefore, the god is linked to time. and he was responsible for the creation of the Egyptian calendars. The main city to worship the god of wisdom was Khemenu, also known as Hermopolis during the Greek domination in Egypt. This city had the largest and best library in ancient Egypt. The millennial Egyptian god of wisdom continues to illuminate the path of those who seek knowledge and search for truth. One of ancient Egypt's most feared animals, the scorpion bears multiple symbolic layers within this age-old culture. For this reason, it comes as no surprise that there is a deity who is intimately connected to this creature. Serket is this goddess's name. One of Egypt's oldest goddesses, she was depicted as a hybrid between a woman and a scorpion. Serket is a deity associated with healing, magic, and poison. Egyptians prayed and offered sacrifices to ask Serket to protect them from snake and scorpion attacks. But as well as acting as a protector, the goddess could also inflict punishment on sinners by sending her venomous beasts to attack them. It was Serket's job to shelter the souls of deceased pharaohs and guide them to the underworld. She would also help in the pharaoh's rebirth process, breathing life into their new mortal bodies. Her role as protector also applied to the living world. Serket was summoned to protect workers, especially those facing danger, such as doctors dealing with poisons and toxins, or workers handling dangerous animals. Her association with poisons and ability to heal those stung by scorpions or snakes gave her a strong association with medicine. Serket amulets were common and used for protection against poisonous bites and stings. Often she was cast in spells and incantations to cure or protect against poisoning. Serket paintings were regularly found in the mummification halls and noble sarcophagi. She may not be as well known as other Egyptian deities, such as Isis or Osiris, but her presence and importance are clearly evident in the context of ancient Egypt. Serket, as guardian and protector, had a vital position in defending both the living and the dead. Osiris is one of the Egyptian pantheon's most revered deities. He represents the essence of order, morality, and civilization. He is a god who triumphed over death and became the lord of the afterlife. Today's video takes us through the history of this famous god and his riveting story. Osiris is usually considered to be the son of Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. This bloodline positions Osiris in an extraordinarily powerful and prestigious role within the divine hierarchy. His siblings include Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Since the dawn of time, Osiris has been associated with order, righteousness, and benevolence. The duality between Osiris and Set reflects the Egyptian belief in the need for balancing opposing forces. Osiris was viewed as a perpetuator of harmony and stability in the universe. He is often described as a righteous and wise king who ruled Egypt before becoming the god of the underworld. The god instructed the Egyptians in agriculture, laws, and the worship of the gods, laying the groundwork for Egyptian society and culture. These principles were key to Egypt's transformation from a nomadic and chaotic civilization into an advanced and organized one. Although they were siblings, Osiris and Isis became husband and wife, a common occurrence among the gods of different mythologies, symbolizing the union of complementary forces. Their marriage was viewed as an ideal model, characterized by deep love, mutual support, and unshakable loyalty. The relationship between Osiris and Isis extends beyond its mythological narrative, assuming a deep religious and spiritual dimension. They are often seen as embodiments of marital loyalty, eternal love, and renewal. In particular, the cult of Isis emphasized these aspects, leading to her being one of the most worshipped goddesses in ancient Egypt. The story of Osiris's death and resurrection is among Egyptian mythology's most significant and powerful myths, embodying themes of treachery, revenge, love, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Set profoundly envied Osiris's position and power as the ruler of Egypt. Fueled by jealousy and ambition, Set masterminded a scheme to wipe out Osiris. He organized a feast and presented a beautiful coffin, vowing to give it to the one who would fit inside it perfectly. As Osiris, without suspecting a thing, entered the coffin, Set and his conspirators promptly closed it and dumped the sarcophagus in the Nile River. Osiris's wife and sister Isis, sorrowful and determined, undertook a long journey to find her husband's body. Her quest took her to many parts of Egypt, and eventually she found him. Upon finding out that Osiris's body had been recovered, Set flew into a rage and dismembered Osiris's corpse, strewing its parts all over Egypt. Together with her sister Nephthys, Isis began another journey, this time to collect the fragments of Osiris's body. Together with Anubis, the god of mummification, they managed to assemble and embalm the body, creating the first mummy. Using magic and spells, Isis succeeded in reviving Osiris briefly. During this brief period, Osiris and Isis conceived their son Horus. After his conception, Osiris was sent back to the underworld, where he became king and supreme judge, playing a vital role in judging souls. Upon his resurrection, Osiris symbolized hope for the afterlife, promising eternal renewal and revival for those deemed worthy. Isis not only had a vital role in resurrecting Osiris, but also in protecting her son Horus, secretly raising him to shield him from Set's wrath. She is often depicted as the ideal mother and protector, a role model for Egyptian queens and mothers. As Duat's ruler, Osiris oversaw keeping order and harmony in the underworld. He was seen as a benevolent king who provided protection for righteous souls and ensured that they enjoyed the pleasures of the Aru, otherwise known as the reed field. Under his rule, the underworld mirrored the living world, with fields to cultivate and rivers to navigate. However, before reaching this gift, the individual's soul was tried in the Hall of Ma'at. Osiris chaired the trial, supported by 42 divine judges who represented the 42 nomos, or districts of Egypt. The departed soul had to declare their innocence from a series of sins and have their heart weighed on the scales of Ma'at against the penalty of truth and justice. If the heart were light, the soul would be deemed righteous and worthy of entering Aru, the Egyptian paradise. If not, the heart was tossed to Amit, a dark creature who would consume it. While mummification was a crucial feature of Egyptian funerary rituals, it was strongly influenced by the Osiris myths. The mummification process was seen as an emulation of Osiris's condition, hoping that, like him, the deceased could be brought back to life and experience the afterlife again. Egyptian funerary rituals and texts, like the Book of the Dead, are littered with Osiris references. They include formulas and incantations meant to help the dead overcome obstacles and reach the presence of Osiris. Osiris as the god of the afterlife profoundly shaped not only religious practices, but also the ancient Egyptians' culture and worldview. His role as judge and guardian of the dead fundamentally molded Egyptian notions of morality, justice, and eternity. Osiris is often portrayed in artistic representations as a mummy, representing his death and resurrection, bearing the symbols of royal power, the staff and the scourge, and often with green or black skin, symbolizing fertility and regeneration. Osiris's death and resurrection are inextricably tied to Egypt's agricultural cycle, especially the Nile's annual floods, bringing fertility and life to the land. This death and renewal cycle in nature bolstered the belief in Osiris's regenerative capacity. Osiris worship had its roots in Egypt's pre-dynastic era, becoming increasingly prominent in the ancient empire and retaining its importance until the Greco-Roman period. Osiris was worshipped throughout Egypt, with cult sites in places such as Abydos and Busiris, where grand temples were built in his honor. Osiris cult entailed a number of rituals and practices. The ceremonies included offerings, prayers, and songs to honor him, looking for his blessings and protection in the afterlife. The Khoik festival was among the most important religious celebrations dedicated to Osiris. Staged annually in Abydos, this feast praised Osiris's death and resurrection. Dramatic processions and rituals during the festival reenacted Isis's search for Osiris's body, her mourning, and the god's ultimate resurrection. These celebrations were not only acts of worship, but also an expression of the belief in eternal life and cyclical renewal. The relationship between Osiris and the ancient Egyptian monarchy was key to the Egyptian understanding of government and royalty. Osiris was viewed as the prototype of the ideal pharaoh. This association between the god and kingship led the pharaohs to strive for the qualities of Osiris, including wisdom, fairness, and the ability to maintain order and harmony. Association with Osiris was essential for the pharaoh's legitimacy. It was thought that, just as Osiris ruled Egypt on earth and then in the underworld, the pharaoh was his proxy on earth, ruling with divine authority. This was reinforced in coronation ceremonies and religious rituals, where the pharaoh was frequently depicted making offerings to Osiris or being blessed by him. Upon death, the pharaohs were identified directly with Osiris. This was such a strong belief that mummification rituals and funerary procedures were intended to transform the dead pharaoh into the god Osiris himself. The pharaoh's tomb was seen as his Osirion, a holy place where he was reborn as Osiris in the underworld. The magical formulas and texts carved on the sarcophagi and pyramid walls often invoked Osiris, attempting to grant the dead pharaoh the same resurrection and eternal life that Osiris had achieved. The Osiris myth also had an impact on the concept of dynastic continuity. Just as Osiris was followed by his son Horus, the pharaoh was often seen as an embodiment of Horus on earth, continuing the divine bloodline. This succession cycle from the deceased pharaoh Osiris to the reigning pharaoh Horus epitomized the continuity and stability of the Egyptian state. Osiris, from his divine roots to his crucial role as the god of the afterlife, represented different values and beliefs that were deeply rooted in Egyptian society. The god left his mark, molding ancient Egypt's spiritual, social, and political dimensions. This made him not just a mythological figure like many others, but a cornerstone that sustained and shone a light on the ancient Egyptian world. In the Egyptian pantheon, Hapi stands as one of the oldest deities. Whereas many Egyptian gods and goddesses have distinct human forms or are zoomorphic representations, Hapi was often portrayed differently. A man with hanging breasts and a sagging belly, often with green or blue skin. These attributes underline his association with fertility and abundance. He is also frequently seen holding offerings or symbols of prosperity and water plants. In all Egyptian religions, Hapi was adored, and his role was so significant that he was often worshipped above Ra, the sun god. He was also referred to as the father of the gods, and although he was represented as a male deity, he had an uncanny breastfeeding ability. The Nile's annual flood was seen as a critically important event in ancient Egypt. This brought with it fertile and mineral-rich sediments, renewing the agricultural land and ensuring abundant harvests. Hapi was revered as the personification of this benign flood. Egyptians held festivals in his honor, expressing gratitude for the waters and the fertility they brought. Such celebrations also served to appease Hapi and ensure that he continued to bless Egypt with good floods. Hapi also played a symbolic role in uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. He was often described as Hapi, unifier of the two kingdoms. This is seen in his depictions, showing him binding the papyrus and the lotus, symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Nile was the wellspring of life for the ancient Egyptians, and Hapi, as the god of the Nile flood, became one of the most revered and crucial deities. By venerating Hapi, the Egyptians showed their gratitude, their longing for prosperity, and an inherent understanding of how vital the Nile waters were to support their magnificent civilization. Hathor is the goddess of fertility and beauty in Egyptian mythology. She is the daughter of Ra, the sun god, making her one of the most important Egyptian deities. The goddess is depicted in Egyptian art in unusual ways. She is often portrayed as a sacred cow, but also as a crowned woman with horns and a solar disk between them. According to some versions, Hathor was seen as Horus's consort. The goddess was worshipped throughout most of the Egyptian world. so her roles as a deity could vary greatly. As stated earlier, Hathor was revered as the goddess of fertility. The Egyptians believed that the pharaohs, when they were born, were breastfed by the goddess, and this enhanced the ruler's divine nature. For this reason, pharaohs were often called children of Hathor. As some versions say, the two sons of the supreme god had disappeared in the beginning of the world. Hathor, also known as Ra's right eye, had the task of finding them. When she returned with the god's children, the deity noticed that the god had developed a new right eye. The bitter goddess wept, and men emerged from her tears. This is why she was also known as the Universal Mother. For having a maternal role, the goddess was invoked to aid in childbirth. Besides being involved with deliveries, the goddess was also associated with death. Hathor would welcome those who had just reached the underworld, providing the newcomers with food and drink. Being bound to the cow figure, the papyrus is the plant consecrated to the goddess, as it was one of the favorite foods of the cows grazing on the Nile riverbanks. The Dendera temple was the most important sanctuary devoted to the goddess. The sick went there in search of treatment, since Hathor was also a goddess tied to healing. The goddess was also known as the Beautiful One, and hence was seen as the deity of beauty and joy. The festivities in her honor were packed with merry dances. Due to her cheerfulness, Hathor was regarded as the goddess of dancing. Hathor's cult lost momentum as the Isis worship grew. Even in the latter shadow, the cult of the cow goddess spread far beyond the Egyptian borders. Throughout the period of Greek and Roman domination over Egypt, and owing to religious syncretism, the Egyptian goddess of beauty came to be associated with Aphrodite by the Greeks and Venus by the Romans. This is why Hathor became one of the main deities of Egyptian mythology. Imhotep was a remarkable ancient Egyptian personality who excelled as a visionary architect, renowned physician, and wise royal advisor. Born in Ankto near Memphis, Imhotep exhibited a razor-sharp mind and an unquenchable curiosity as early as his youth. Conifer, Imhotep's father, was a highly respected architect, and he spotted his son's extraordinary talent early on and introduced him to the building trade. Imhotep's genius quickly attracted Pharaoh Dozier's attention, who recruited him to serve as his royal advisor. Imhotep humbly accepted and soon distinguished himself not only as an architect, but also as a doctor and priest. His legacy started to take shape in the limestones of the Saqqara necropolis, where he challenged traditions by designing the Pyramid of Djoser with steps and galleries, a majestic structure that stood out against the horizon. Imhotep was also renowned for his medical skills, and temple corridors echoed with tales of his miraculous cures. His bond with the healing deity Sekhmet lent a divine aura to his procedures. People started to revere him not just as a brilliant architect, but as a being gifted with celestial wisdom. Imhotep's life was laced with mysteries and superstitions. It was said that he had the gift of interpreting dreams, a skill that the pharaoh deeply prized. His medical and architectural writings were regarded as sacred texts, and his teachings were employed in many areas for the benefit of the Egyptian people. As time went by, Imhotep grew into a venerable character, and his deification was bound to happen. Following Imhotep's death, the Egyptian authorities raised him to the rank of a deity, serving as the god of wisdom and medicine. Temples were built in his honor, and future generations turned to him as an icon and a source of inspiration. Imhotep's name reverberates through the centuries as a byword for intelligence, creativity, and spirituality. His quest, filled with challenges, successes, and mysteries, still inspires those who look for the truth in studying and learning from the past. Anur was an Egyptian god of war and hunting, worshipped mainly during the Middle Kingdom. He was the leader of the Egyptian army and the protector of the warriors. The pharaohs and their armies often invoked him to protect and favor them in battle. Anur was also seen as a god of survival, having powers to feed the people, as he was the god of hunting. He was sometimes depicted as a strong man with a spear, but the best-known image of him is that of a man with a lion's head, representing strength and bravery. Anur was also responsible for keeping his father, the sun god Ra, safe. Anur stood in front of Ra's solar barge, protecting him from the terrible serpent Apophis. This is how he got the nickname Slayer of Enemies, which later came to be given to Set. Anur was the god of war, but was not always violent. His role was to make people creative. During festivals held to honor the lion god, battles and heroic acts were staged to honor him.
Taweret is one of the most fascinating goddesses in ancient Egyptian mythology. She is depicted as a female figure with a hippopotamus's head, lion's legs, and human breasts, a crocodile's tail, some of the most dangerous animals in Egyptian fauna. Despite this, Taweret was considered a goddess of protection and childbirth, and was often called upon by women who were pregnant or wished to become mothers. The goddess Taweret was popular among ancient Egyptians, often represented with amulets and ornaments. Her image was considered a protective symbol against illness and death, especially during childbirth. She was also seen as a guardian of the afterlife, helping the deceased to overcome dangers in the world of the dead. According to some versions of Egyptian myths, Taweret was the wife of Set, the god of violence and chaos. While this association may initially seem strange, the ancient Egyptians believed that Taweret could tame Set's rage and use it to benefit those in need of protection. Besides being a protective goddess, Taweret was considered a deity associated with water. The hippopotamus, the animal on her head, was often associated with Egypt's rivers and lakes. In Egyptian mythology, waters were a site of power and mystery, where spirits and deities could be found. As a goddess connected to the waters, Taweret was seen as a guardian of these mysteries and protector of travelers navigating the rivers. Although the goddess Taweret was an extremely important figure in ancient Egyptian mythology, little is known about her origins. Some scholars believe that she may have originally been a goddess from the Nile Delta region, where the hippopotamus was a very common animal. Others indicate that Taweret may have been imported from other regions, possibly Nubia or Libya. Regardless of the exact origins, Taweret is one of the most fascinating goddesses in Egyptian mythology, and her image is still a symbol of protection and good luck.
In Egyptian mythology, Horus is the god of the sky. He embodies power, protection, and renewal. As the son of Isis, the goddess of magic, and Osiris, the god of the afterlife, Horus holds a main place in Egyptian mythology. He is often depicted as a man with a falcon's head, symbolizing his sovereignty over the sky. This crowned divine bird not only stands for celestial power and kingship, but also plays a key role in maintaining order and justice in the universe. The Horus myth embraces themes of revenge, justice, and political power. By worshipping Horus, the ancient Egyptians voiced their longing for stability, order, and continuity, all crucial elements for a prosperous and stable society. The god's birth is the outcome of one of the most dramatic and famous myths of ancient Egypt. The story of his rise begins with Osiris being murdered by his brother Set, who was jealous and ambitious. Set dismembered Osiris's body and scattered its parts throughout Egypt. In her relentless pursuit, Isis gathered the pieces of her husband's body and, using her magical powers, temporarily revived him. During this brief period of renewed life, Isis conceived Horus. He was born not only as a god, but also as a symbol of hope and renewal for the Egyptian world. His very existence was seen as a triumph over death and chaos, as represented by Set, and a symbol that order and justice could be restored. Horus was conceived to fight Set, trying to avenge his father's death and restore order. This battle was more than a mere confrontation between two gods. It was the eternal struggle between order and chaos, good and evil, light and darkness. With his association with the sky, the sun, and kingship, Horus represents order, stability, and legitimacy. By contrast, Set symbolizes the disruptive and volatile forces of the universe, the unexpected, and the destructive. In many versions of this myth, the battle between them is lengthy and brutal, with each god losing and winning at various times. This narrative echoes the Egyptian understanding that the universe's balance is a dynamic phenomenon, where order and chaos are in constant turmoil. One of the most iconic details of this struggle is when Horus loses one of his eyes, which is later recovered, representing the notion of renewal and healing following the conflict. This Eye of Horus was a powerful symbol of protection and health in ancient Egypt. The conflict ended in an unusual way when Set was offered a lettuce in which Horus poured his divine seed. This humiliation gave Horus a position of superiority over Set, who now had the seed of order inside him. With Horus's triumph, he was granted the right by the divine court to exercise the authority that previously belonged to his father. As the incarnations of Horus, the pharaohs were considered Egypt's legitimate rulers, meant to maintain order against the forces of chaos. Horus is heavily tied to the establishment of the unified Egyptian state, a process that merges two distinct regions, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, into a single political and cultural entity. Horus is traditionally affiliated with Upper Egypt, but his iconographic depiction after unification often features him wearing a double crown. This is a merger of the Upper Egyptian white crown and the Lower Egyptian red crown. The double crown not only symbolizes the political unification of both regions, but also Horus's role as a unifier and a keeper of order and stability throughout Egypt. Horus's mythical feud with Set is also taken as an allegory for unification. In this context, Horus stands for the forces of order, legitimacy, and unification, whereas Set symbolizes the powers of chaos and disunity. Horus's eventual victory over Set is viewed as a metaphor for bridging internal divisions and establishing a unified state under central leadership. Additionally, as the protector of the pharaohs in the kingdom, Horus became an even more meaningful deity following unification. The unified Egyptian pharaohs were often portrayed as living incarnations of Horus. This reinforced the idea that the pharaoh was the legitimate ruler, meant to uphold unity and order throughout the kingdom, just as Horus had done. The reign of a pharaoh as an incarnation of Horus was not only a political event, but also an act of maintaining cosmic order. Horus was venerated throughout Egypt, and his cult is one of the earliest in ancient Egyptian religious history. Horus worship pervaded many aspects of Egyptian life, from the political sphere to everyday life, and was deeply ingrained in Egyptian culture and religion. The temples consecrated to Horus were worship sites and played an important role in local economic and political life. These temples' architecture was magnificent, with massive pillars, open courtyards, and sacred shrines. The walls were ornamented with reliefs and detailed engravings, illustrating Horus-related myths, worship rituals, and everyday scenes. Horus cult involved many rituals and festivals. Among the most important was the celebration of Horus's victory over Set, symbolizing the triumph of order over chaos. At such festivals, Horus statues were taken in processions, and the worshippers offered sacrifices and prayers. Additional rituals included daily offerings, songs, and prayers, as well as purification and renewal rituals. Horus also had a role to perform in the Egyptians' daily lives. He was used as protection against danger, to cure illnesses, especially in children, and as a guardian at moments of passage, such as death. Egyptian artistic representations of Horus express this deity's importance and complexity in the Egyptian pantheon. Horus iconography is encountered in a wide range of contexts, from grandiose sculptures and reliefs in temples to dainty paintings in tombs and everyday objects. The sculptures frequently depict Horus in a regal and imposing posture. Statues of Horus as a falcon, or as a man with a falcon's head, were common and frequently placed in temples as a symbol of protection and divine power. These sculptures range in size from small bronze figures to large stone statues. In temples dedicated to Horus, especially in Edfu, wall reliefs depict mythological scenes involving Horus, featuring his fight against Set, his association with the pharaoh, and his role in maintaining cosmic order. These embossments are saturated with detail and symbolic narratives. Horus was often portrayed in the tombs as a protector of the dead. He is seen leading the deceased to the afterlife or providing protection against evil spirits. These images underline the belief in intercession and in Horus's protective role in the afterlife. The god also appeared on a range of artifacts, such as amulets, jewelry, and everyday objects. The Eye of Horus in particular, a symbol of protection, health, and restoration, was a frequent image on amulets and paintings. As one of the most iconic deities in Egyptian mythology, Horus holds a prominent place in both the religion and culture of ancient Egypt. His art representations, from majestic sculptures in temples to delicate paintings in tombs, exemplify the reverence and importance attributed to him over millennia. Apophis, also known as Apep, is a giant serpent in Egyptian mythology. This massive serpent is an agent of chaos and enemy of Ra, the solar deity. The serpent embodies evil and chaos. Apophis lived in the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a place where he hid to try to ambush the solar god as he made his way through the underworld at night. The giant serpent was capable of causing earthquakes while moving in the depths. When Ra was about to complete his journey through the underworld, he was always attacked by Apophis. Apep's biggest wish was to destroy Ra's solar boat and throw the world into darkness. In some occasions, Apophis managed to swallow Ra's boat, but could not keep it in his belly. This period when the sun was swallowed by Apep was the origin of solar eclipses. Ra started to be aided by other deities in his daily struggle against the colossal serpent. The god Seth stood beside the solar deity in his boat. He positioned himself at the bow, ready for the serpent's unavoidable attack. When the creature emerged to strike them, Seth maimed Apophis with a spear. Whenever Apophis had been wounded, the sky became red. Bastet, the cat-headed goddess, also helped Ra. Felines are known to hunt and scare serpents away. Considering his malign nature, Apophis was rejected by the ancient Egyptians, and no temple was edified in his honor. Nevertheless, there are reports on the existence of some sects that worshipped the creature. These were seen as immoral and corrupt people. The Egyptians organized rituals and prayed for Ra's victory over Apophis, and the birth of a new day meant that the sun god had come out victorious once more. There was a priesthood book that contained the rituals and practices needed to combat Apep. A ritual intended to banish chaos was held annually. A depiction of Apophis was burned during it, while the faithful prayed for another triumphant year of Ra. Some reports state that Ra defeated Apophis and imprisoned the serpent, protecting the cosmic order. But others claim that the struggle between Ra and Apophis will last forever.
Sekhmet is the goddess of vengeance in Egyptian mythology. She is represented as a woman with a lioness head. The name Sekhmet means the powerful one. According to some versions, she was the daughter of Ra, the sun god. Therefore, she is also identified as a sun goddess. Ra begot Sekhmet to punish men who refused to obey the god's designs. The lioness goddess descended from heaven to earth and began to enforce Ra's vengeance on men. The goddess was ruthless with those who were unfaithful to Ra. Sekhmet spread terrible diseases and devoured Ra's enemies. However, the goddess took delight in bloodshed. The goddess's bloodlust was so great that Sekhmet began to guide her rage against the innocent. Ra became worried when he realized his daughter was out of control. To diminish her desire for blood, he devised a plan. Ra offered wine to the lioness goddess. She, thinking it was blood because of the color, drank the wine with pleasure. The drink calmed the goddess, and the sun god took her back to heaven. Sekhmet was also considered a warrior goddess and defender of Egypt. Egyptian soldiers believed that Sekhmet fought alongside them against Egypt's enemies. After bloody battles, the priests who accompanied the army held ceremonies to thank the lioness goddess for her protection. These ceremonies also soothed the goddess and showed that more bloodshed was unnecessary. Sekhmet was also considered the pharaoh's protector. She was always at the ruler's side until the day of his death, when she escorted him to the entrance of the other world. When a hot wind blew, the Egyptians believed it to be the lioness goddess's breath. Capable of breeding disease to punish her enemies, she could also stop any sickness. Therefore, the Egyptians begged Sekhmet to cure them. For this reason, the goddess also had the epithet Lady of Life. The city of Memphis was the center of worship of the goddess. On the last day of the year, a great festival was held in honor of the goddess. This celebration was paired with a lot of wine, as they wished to please Sekhmet and avoid the wrath of the powerful goddess of vengeance.
Ra is the sun god in Egyptian mythology. This god is usually depicted as a being with a man's body and a head of a falcon. The sun disk is over his head. He had been one day the greatest of all gods, but time wore him down, and finding himself too old, he decided to relinquish the power and go to the skies. This god is one of the most revered figures in Egyptian mythology. As the sun god, one of his duties was to drive away the darkness, and to accomplish his work, the god crossed the skies on his sunboat, lighting the whole world. But when the twilight came, he and his vessel plunged into the sea waters towards the underworld. There he would have to sail through the dark world and cross the 12 gates, which would be the 12 regions of the netherworld. Ra took an hour to go through each gate. Osiris was in one of them, the lord of the underworld, whom Ra always visited to pay his respects. But before leaving the underworld's darkness, the god was attacked by the terrible snake Apophis. This force of chaos tried to destroy the god's vessel, and each day the serpent seemed closer to accomplish her desire. Apophis once managed to swallow the sunboat, putting an end to the sunlight in the morning. But the serpent failed to hold the god in her stomach and regurgitated him. This event was marked as a solar eclipse. However, destroying Ra's boat became more difficult, since Set, the god of destruction, after losing the dispute of the supreme throne for Horus, had been condemned to navigate with Ra across the skies. He helped the sun god, defending his vessel against the terrible serpent, defeating it several times, making Ra's underworld journey safer. The god Ra was a figure worshipped throughout Egypt, but this god was especially adored in the city of Heliopolis. The god's prestige was so vast that other traditions of Egyptian religions of antiquity merged the god's depiction along with the greatest figure of their own pantheons. For instance, the figures of the supreme gods Amun and Atum were also known as Amun-Ra and Atum-Ra. The god's name was used by many pharaohs. Ramses is a well-known example. His name means son of Ra, or the son of sun, and so the pharaoh would strengthen his divinity before his subjects.